Night shifts always give me a strange sense of solitude and contemplation. It's like the hospital itself is resting, recovering from the constant buzz of daylight hours, I mused, walking down the long, sterile corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting a pale, clinical glow over the empty stretch of hall. I glanced down at my clipboard. All the vitals were normal. The night was uneventful, just the way I liked it. And yet, as I raised my head, my eyes were involuntarily drawn to the hallway map mounted on the wall next to the nursing station. A red dot was blinking in room 217. That was odd. Very odd. Room 217 had been vacant for months. Maintenance had been using it for storage while they refurbished other sections of the building. And let's not forget the absurd rumors that floated around. The ones about strange, inexplicable occurrences, the whispers among janitors and even some nurses that the room was haunted. I stared at the blinking dot for a long moment. Should I ignore it? Rationality argued that it could be a glitch, or maybe a prank by one of the janitors. But curiosity had me in its grip. I found myself walking toward the room almost against my own volition. The corridor seemed to stretch longer and darker as I moved closer to room 217. My footsteps echoed softly, sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I reached for the small flashlight I kept on my belt, illuminating patches of the floor as I walked. Finally, I was there. The door to room 217 stood slightly ajar. A soft glow of light filtered through the crack, painting flickering shadows on the corridor floor. The number, 217 inches, was displayed in faded brass above the door. I felt a shiver crawl up my back. I was sure I'd turned off all the lights when my shift started. Carefully, I nudged the door open with my foot. Peering inside, I felt my breath catch. The room was not as it should be. The lights were on, yes, but it was what was under the lights that startled me. The furniture was old, much older than anything the hospital used. It looked like something out of a 19th century sanitarium. Drawing a deep breath to steady my nerves, I stepped fully into the room. The door creaked closed behind me almost as if pulled by an unseen hand. I was in room 217 now, and something told me that the night was about to get a lot more interesting, or terrifying. I was fully inside room 217 now, my eyes scanning the antiquated surroundings. The walls were adorned with peeling floral wallpaper, and the ancient bed in the corner was made up with crisp white sheets that looked almost ghostly in the soft light. Despite the room's eerie vibes, it was what was on the desk that caught my attention. There were medical files, stacks of them, covered in a thin layer of dust. These files looked incredibly old, their yellowed pages filled with inked handwriting rather than typed text. Intrigued and puzzled, I approached the desk and picked up the topmost file. The name Eleanor Grimm was scrawled on the tab. I opened it and began to read. Eleanor Grimm had been a patient here in the late 1800s, admitted for hysteria. The treatments documented were primitive and frightening: shock therapy, cold water immersions, and other torturous methodologies long since abandoned. I felt a chill run down my spine. How did these files get here? They should have been in the hospital archives, not gathering dust in an empty room. I looked up from the file and scanned the room again, half expecting to see Eleanor Grimm standing in the corner eyeing me reproachfully. Just then my radio crackled to life, jolting me. Nurse station to Sarah. Sarah, please come in. Over. I grabbed my radio, my hand trembling a bit. This is Sarah. What's up? Over. Is everything all right? You've been away for a while. I'm fine, I replied, still staring at the files. Just dealing with some unexpected paperwork. Well, hurry back. We need to prepare for the morning shift. I'll be there soon, I said, carefully placing the file back on the desk. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the cracked mirror on the wall. A fleeting shadow that wasn't mine. The room suddenly felt colder. I made a hasty exit, closing the door firmly behind me. Room 217 was just as I'd found it, empty and now locked. But something told me that whatever secrets were locked inside that room, they didn't intend to stay that way for long. The walk back to the nurse station felt longer than before. My mind was racing, struggling to make sense of what I had just seen. Eleanor Grimm, an almost mythical character straight out of a horror story, was becoming disturbingly real. And those treatments so cruel, so inhumane, it made me shudder. Jane didn't press further. Perhaps sensing that I wasn't quite ready to talk about it, I moved to my desk and began preparing for the morning shift. Assignments to hand out, medication to distribute. It was all so hauntingly normal after the events of the past hour. The rest of the night went on without any further oddities. No strange calls, no vanishing patients, and certainly no more ghostly files. Yet despite the apparent return to normality, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled deep within me. Eleanor Grimm had once roamed these hallways. Her suffering was documented, real. How many others like her had there been? As I clocked out, I couldn't help but glance down the corridor that led to room 217. It was just a room, one of many. Yet it held secrets, echoes of a time long past, but perhaps not entirely forgotten. About an hour later, the day crew started trickling in, breaking the night's solitude. Doctors, nurses, and janitorial staff all walking in with coffee cups and morning chatter. The hospital came alive, and for a moment the eerie happenings of the night seemed like a distant dream. Around mid-morning, as I was finally catching a breather, I looked up to find a man standing at the nurse's station. He was middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and wearing an old-fashioned suit that looked like it belonged in another era. His eyes met mine and he smiled politely. "I'm here to visit Eleanor Grimm." The blood in my veins turned to ice. "I'm sorry, who did you say you're here to visit?" "Eleanor Grimm," he repeated calmly. "That's not possible," I stammered. "There's no patient by that name here." The man raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? I have an appointment." His insistence rattled me, and I found myself fumbling with the computer, pulling up the hospital's patient database. I typed in Eleanor Grimm, half expecting nothing to come up. But to my astonishment, there it was, a new entry, complete with room number, 217. I could hardly believe my eyes as I stared at the computer screen. The man smiled again. "Ah, so you found her. May I proceed to room 217? Feeling like I was in a trance, I nodded. "Go ahead, it's just down the corridor to the left." He thanked me and walked away, his footsteps growing fainter as he moved down the hall. My curiosity now piqued beyond reason. I decided to follow him discreetly. My steps felt mechanical, as if I was being pulled along by an invisible force. When I reached room 217, I peered through the window on the door. The room was empty, just as I remembered it. But the man was there, speaking to the air as if having a conversation with someone. I blinked hard, half expecting him to vanish, but he was still there. He finished his conversation, looked towards the door as if sensing my presence, and walked out. Our eyes met for a moment, but he passed by me without saying a word. I stood frozen for a moment before rushing back to the nurse's station. I needed to know more about Eleanor Grimm. Scrolling through the computer database, I found something that made my stomach churn. A photograph of Eleanor. She looked exactly like the woman I had seen reflected in the mirror earlier. Shaken, I delved deeper into her records and found out she had been a patient at the hospital 50 years ago. According to the old documents, Eleanor had mysteriously vanished one night, and her disappearance had never been solved. I couldn't shake off the idea that I had somehow stepped into a loop of past events. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from the hospital's main number. "Thank you for updating the patient records. Room 217 is now officially closed for maintenance." And so, the questions remain. Who was the man visiting Eleanor Grimm? How is it possible that she appeared in the system after all these years? Most importantly, will room 217 ever be just another hospital room again? I left the hospital that day with more questions than answers. But one thing was abundantly clear. Room 217 was far from empty. It was filled with memories, pain, and maybe even something more. Something that didn't intend to stay locked away for much longer. It was shaping up to be another quiet night. The neon glow of fast food signs flickered in the distance, casting a hazy light on the empty streets. The night had always been my sanctuary, the time when I could escape the noise of the day and just focus on the road. Door-dashing wasn't a dream job, but it paid the bills and gave me plenty of time to think. My phone buzzed, breaking my reverie. A new order. "Mickey's Diner," the screen read. The order details popped up. A double cheeseburger, fries, and a large shake. Simple enough. I navigated my way to Mickey's, a local joint known for its greasy food and late-night service. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed something odd. My car was the only one there. This place was usually bustling with activity, especially on a Saturday night. Chalking it up to just another anomaly in an increasingly strange world, I headed inside. The diner was empty, save for the lone figure of Tony, the night manager. He looked even more worn out than usual, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "Hey, Tom, you're the first dasher I've seen tonight," he said, handing me a paper bag with the order. That's weird, I replied. But it's been a slow night. Maybe people are out partying instead of ordering in. Maybe, he said, but his eyes told a different story, as if he were holding back something unsettling. I took the bag and headed back to my car. As I looked at the DoorDash app to confirm the delivery address, my eyes widened. The address was for a location at the very edge of town, an area known as Harrington Woods. It was a place riddled with myths and local legends, mainly because it was close to an abandoned mental asylum. I hesitated for a moment. It would be a long drive, and the night was already setting an eerie tone. But then again, a job's a job, and the customer had tipped generously in advance. Revving the engine, I set the GPS and started my journey toward Harrington Woods, completely unaware that this delivery would become an order I'd never forget. The drive was longer than I had expected. The streets grew increasingly desolate as I moved farther from the city center. Buildings gave way to open fields, and the road became narrow and twisted, framed by thick forests on either side. My headlights barely pierced the inky blackness, giving the journey an unsettling edge. As I neared Harrington Woods, I saw the dilapidated sign that marked its entrance. The words Harrington Asylum, closed, were barely visible, covered by graffiti and years of wear. An involuntary shudder went through me. There were stories about this place. Horrible stories. Disappearances, hauntings, and worse. I turned into a gravel path that led deeper into the woods, my car's tires crunching loudly in the silence. My GPS announced that I was nearing my destination, but when I looked around, there was nothing. No house, no lights, just an empty clearing surrounded by trees. Confused and a little unnerved, I parked the car and picked up my phone to double-check the address. It matched. Was this some sort of prank? Maybe someone was trying to mess with me. Just as I was about to mark the delivery as undeliverable, my phone buzzed again. A message popped up on the DoorDash app. Leave the food at the door. No need to knock. What door? There was nothing here. And then, just as I was contemplating my next move, I saw it. A flickering light in the distance, just beyond the clearing. It looked like a lantern, hanging from what seemed to be the front porch of a hidden, overgrown building. With a sense of growing dread, I took the food bag and started walking toward the light. Every step felt heavy, and my instincts were screaming at me to turn back. But I pressed on until I reached the porch and saw the door. It was old, wooden, and slightly ajar. I placed the food on the doormat, snapped a picture as proof of delivery, and then turned to leave. But just as I did, I heard it. A soft, whispering voice, almost drowned out by the wind rustling through the trees. Thank you, Tom. I looked back. The door was now wide open, but there was no one there. The next day, I couldn't shake off the unease that enveloped me. Who had whispered my name? How did they even know it? My shift started in the evening again, and the memory of that strange delivery haunted me throughout the day. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I had to investigate. I reached out to some friends who were into local lore and asked them about Harrington Woods and the old asylum. Most of them had heard stories but thought it was all just urban legend, talk of spectral apparitions and eerie voices in the night. One friend, however, sent me an old newspaper clipping about a patient who had vanished from Harrington Asylum under mysterious circumstances years before it was shut down. The patient's name was Charles, and he had ordered meals from town every night because he couldn't stand the hospital food. The delivery people had often recounted seeing a light flicker in his room's window as a signal for them to come. Chills ran down my spine. Was Charles still there, waiting for his meal deliveries? I decided that tonight I would return to Harrington Woods after my shift ended. I needed answers. Nightfall arrived quickly, and I was back on the lonely road to Harrington Woods before I knew it. Armed with a flashlight and my phone, I reached the same gravel path and parked my car. The clearing looked just as desolate as before, but this time there was no light. Tensing up, I turned on my flashlight and cautiously approached the overgrown building. As I walked, the beam of light flickered over something metallic on the ground. It was a DoorDash name tag, corroded and covered in grime. My name, Tom, was barely visible. Heart pounding, I reached the porch again. The door was closed this time. I hesitated, then pushed it open. It creaked loudly, revealing an empty, decrepit room filled with rotting furniture. There was no sign of life or of the food I'd left the previous night. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, I heard it again. The soft whisper, the one that had haunted my thoughts all day. Thank you, Tom. Shivers cascaded down my spine. That voice, ethereal yet all too real, echoed in the emptiness around me. Thank you, Tom. It felt as though it came from all directions at once. I quickly turned my flashlight around, illuminating the dusty corners and shadowy nooks of the room. There was no one there. I'm losing it, I muttered to myself, gripping the flashlight tightly. I knew I had to get out of there. I retraced my steps back to the car, the crunch of gravel underfoot seeming unnaturally loud in the still night. But then, just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, my car didn't start. The engine sputtered and failed. "You've got to be kidding me," I said aloud, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. I took out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. A sense of dread enveloped me. I was alone with no way to call for help, right next to an abandoned asylum that I was now convinced was haunted. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and when it steadied, I saw it. A message fogged onto my car's window from the inside. It read, "See you tomorrow, Tom." Stunned, I got out of the car, flashlight in hand, and walked back to the road, hoping to hitch a ride or find a signal. But as I looked back, my car's headlights blinked twice, as if bidding me goodbye. I finally managed to catch a lift with a passing trucker, but I knew I'd never be the same. Someone or something at Harrington Woods knew me, and it had no intention of being forgotten. The next day was a blur. I had to call a tow truck to retrieve my car from Harrington Woods. The mechanic said there was nothing wrong with it, no reason it shouldn't have started. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Everywhere I went, whether it was the grocery store or the gas station, I felt eyes on me. I looked over my shoulder frequently, half expecting to see a shadowy figure standing there, but there was no one. That night I had a new DoorDash assignment. I couldn't decline. I needed the money, but every ping from the app made me jump. Finally, an order came in from a well-known fast food place. Routine, normal, or so I thought. I picked up the order and drove to the delivery address. It was a suburban home like any other. I rang the doorbell and waited. The door creaked open slowly. I held out the bag of food and said, "DoorDash delivery for Susan." A voice from the darkness inside answered, "Thank you, Tom." I handed over the bag, still unable to see who was receiving it. Then, as the door was closing, a cold hand gripped my wrist for a moment. "See you tomorrow, Tom," the voice whispered. I pulled my hand back, shocked and scared out of my wits. The door closed. I returned to my car, trembling. My phone pinged. It was another order. I looked at the screen and froze. The order was for the same fast food place, but the delivery address was for Harrington Woods. I declined the order and drove home, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong, and I had no idea how to escape it. It seemed like the haunting of Harrington Woods had followed me, and it was far from over. My name is Emily, and I work as a night shift janitor at Metro Tech, a sprawling corporate office complex. I've been doing this job for 3 years, and I thought I had seen it all. The oddball office workers who stay late, strange elevator music that would occasionally go haywire, even raccoons rummaging through the dumpsters outside. But nothing had prepared me for what would happen one cold November night. It started as a regular shift. I clocked in at 11 p.m., made some coffee in the dingy break room, and reviewed my cleaning schedule. First up was the main lobby, then the bathrooms, and finally the individual office floors. Simple enough. I started by vacuuming the thick carpets in the lobby, where the dim overhead lights always seemed to flicker more than usual. Tonight, though, they were stable, which I took as a good sign. With my earbuds in, I was lost in my little world of podcasts and cleaning. I finished the lobby and moved on to the bathrooms. As I scrubbed the sinks and cleaned the mirrors, I felt a weird sensation, a chill down my spine like someone was watching me. I looked around, expecting to see one of the security guards, but there was no one. Shrugging it off, I continued my work. Then something odd happened. The lights in the bathroom suddenly dimmed for a second and then brightened again. Puzzled, I looked up at the lights, but they seemed normal now. I exited the bathroom and started to push my cleaning cart towards the elevators. That's when I heard it. The sound of another janitorial cart moving. Its wheels squeaked in the same way mine did when they needed oiling. But that was impossible. I was the only janitor scheduled for the night shift. Curiosity getting the better of me, I followed the sound. It seemed to be coming from the floor above me. Was someone else here? Another janitor? A prankster? My heart started to race as I approached the elevator and pressed the button to go up. The elevator dinged, its doors opened, and I stepped inside, steeling myself for whatever, or whoever was waiting for me on the other side. The elevator moved painfully slow, its journey accompanied by a soft, eerie tune that seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. When it finally reached the floor above, the doors hesitated for a moment before sliding open. as if reluctant to release me into the unfamiliar territory. I pushed my cart out and began to explore the floor. Unlike the open-plan setup on my regular floors, this one was a maze of narrow hallways and small, old-fashioned offices, each door sporting an ornate golden number. It felt like I'd stepped into a different era. I could still hear the distant squeak of the other janitorial cart, now accompanied by faint, indistinct whispers. My heart pounded in my chest as I advanced cautiously, every turn in the maze making me feel more disoriented. Finally, I reached the source of the sounds. I found another cleaning cart identical to mine, parked outside an office with the door slightly ajar. The office was marked 237, a number that held no significance for me but emanated an unsettling vibe. Taking a deep breath, I nudged the door open further and peered inside. The room was dark except for a single desk lamp illuminating a journal and a photograph. The photo depicted a janitor, not unlike myself, but her face was scratched out. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, morphing into a low, incomprehensible muttering that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Before I could turn and flee, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into total darkness. Then, as abruptly as they had started, the whispers ceased. I felt around for the doorknob, my hands shaking uncontrollably. When I finally found it and twisted, the door swung open effortlessly. I stumbled out into the hallway, my cart still where I had left it, but the other cart was gone. Vanished. Rushing back to the elevator, I slammed the button to descend, and this time the doors closed quickly as if eager to whisk me away. When I reached my usual floor, everything seemed normal, but the sense of normality now felt like the biggest illusion of them all. I quickly returned to my original floor, my hands still shaking as I parked the cart back in its rightful place. The other janitors were starting to trickle in, greeting me with cheerful waves that I could only weakly return. "No hiccups tonight, I hope?" my supervisor, Karen, asked as she passed by, checking the cleaning inventory. "No, everything's fine," I said, hesitating slightly. "Just fine." "Great. Make sure you sign off on your duties and you can head out." I nodded and quickly did as instructed, scribbling my signature on the logbook with a trembling hand. As I reached for my coat and bag, I glanced at the security monitors perched on the counter. They displayed live feeds of the various floors, including the one I had never been assigned to but had somehow cleaned tonight. As I looked closer, I could see a janitorial cart parked outside room 237. My eyes widened in disbelief. I blinked and it was gone as if it had never been there. I grabbed my bag and left without saying another word, the atmosphere in the room suffocating me. The moment I stepped out into the chilly night air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me as if I had narrowly escaped something horrifying. But as I walked to my car, parked in its usual spot in the underground garage, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I unlocked the car and climbed in, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows, but when I blinked, it was gone. I started the car and sped out of the parking lot, not looking back. Whatever had happened tonight, one thing was clear. The building held secrets ancient and terrifying, and I had gotten far too close for comfort. The next night was unsurprisingly uneasy for me. As I clocked in, I noticed that Karen was going through some old records, files dating back years. It piqued my curiosity, but I didn't dare ask. Tonight, my assignment was back on familiar grounds, floors I had cleaned 100 times over. But even as I went about my duties, a sense of dread enveloped me. Every flickering light and every distant echo seemed magnified, playing tricks on my already jumpy nerves. I had just finished mopping the 5th floor and was getting ready to move on when my eyes caught something strange reflected in the polished marble floor. A second janitorial cart, identical to mine, was parked about 20 feet away. I glanced up, but there was nothing there. Rattled, I decided to call it a night. I made my way to the janitorial room to park my cart and sign off. That's when I saw it. The logbook was already open, displaying my signature under today's date. Only I hadn't signed it yet. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I had been under a lot of stress and could easily be imagining things. With a shaky hand, I signed next to the inexplicable first signature, closed the book, and left the building. As I got into my car, I felt a sudden warmth enveloping me, like an invisible force was telling me to stay away, to never come back. And as I drove away, I looked at the building one last time. In one of the windows on the forbidden floor, I saw a figure waving goodbye. I hit the gas and didn't look back. Something told me that I had been granted a rare glimpse into something beyond comprehension, something that had always been there but would now forever remain unseen. The days that followed were a blur. I took some time off work, feigning illness. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I had experienced, but it was something that defied rational explanation. Friends told me to chalk it up as stress or fatigue, but deep down, I knew better. It was the last time I set foot in that building. In the shadows of the night, if our tales from unsettling horror stories gave you a fright, press like and let it be known. Subscribe, so you're never alone in this haunting journey, and share, so others too can be wary. Until our next sinister tale, stay dark, dear listener.